about 1,100,000 Jews arrived here, and about 1 million of them were killed. Where we are now, Auschwitz II, Birkenau, is both the largest slave labor camp and the largest death camp. Both things here are the case. Just as it was forbidden for Germans to take pictures in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they sent an SS crew to take official pictures in the Warsaw Ghetto, they did the same thing here in Auschwitz. And so here is a Hungarian transport arriving in the spring of 1944. Here you see them. Right there is the watchtower. You can see the watchtower. And here is the train. And here are the people milling around. You see people in striped uniforms. Those are the prisoners. And you see German officers, and then you see many Hungarian Jews. And they've come off the trains, and they're on the far side, right over there, where that group is starting to walk towards us. That's where they are. And here they're lined up. They're separated, men and women. And if you count, you'll see they're separated into rows of 5. Makes it easy to count. 5, 10, 15. One of the amazing things here is that if you look closely, you see they're all wearing winter coats. Why are they all wearing winter coats if it's May, June, and July 1944?
They thought they were going to be staying for a while.
There's no snow. There's no snow.
They're going to be staying for a while.
They were told that they could take one suitcase, and there was a weight limit on the suitcase. By the way, this was also part of the German plan, because this way the Jews would carry with them their most valuable things, possessions, which made the job easier of confiscation of property by the Germans. The Jews were doing it themselves. So they take their most important possessions, they put them in a suitcase. Now you've got a winter coat. Winter coats in those days were not like our lightweight down coats today that can fold into a pouch. Winter coats were winter coats. It would take up half the suitcase. So what did they do? They wore their winter coats. What does that tell us? If it was May, June, and July,
they were going to need it. They thought they were going to need it.
They believed the Germans that they were being resettled in the East and they would do labor, or if they doubted the Germans, if they thought the Germans were lying to them, they said, well, you know what? Maybe it's true. Maybe. Most of them probably thought a little bit this way, but maybe it's that way. This is true of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto too. When they hear about the Jews of Lithuania being massacred, and they're sitting in the Warsaw Ghetto, most of them say to themselves, you know what, that's Lithuania. It was part of the Soviet Union. That's why they're doing it there. Here we're in ghettos. We see they're not killing us. Part of this goes to the idea that people don't want to believe the worst. For the most part, most people don't want to believe the worst. As Helena Birnbaum titles her book, Hope is the Last to Die. Lily Jacobs survives Auschwitz, and she goes on a death march, and she's taken into Germany, and she is brought to some kind of a labor camp. And one day in 1945, the prisoners wake up and the guards are gone because the Allies are very close and they flee. And so they look around, they can't believe the guards are gone. The Allies haven't yet come. but they're no longer under the thumb of the Nazis. So Lily Jacobs, she's hungry. She goes into what was a former SS barracks looking for food. And as she's looking for food, she finds a photo album. It's the photographs that the SS took here in Auschwitz of that Hungarian deportation. More than 100 photographs. And she opens the book and she looks at the photographs. They're from her hometown. Another deportation from her hometown in Hungary. What are the chances of that? 1 out of a million? Well, guess what? She was 1 out of a million. She finds the photographs. She sees relatives. She sees friends in the photographs. You know what a photograph of a relative or a friend was worth. Who had photographs anymore? I don't have photographs of my grandfather, one of my grandfathers. My wife doesn't have photographs of her half-brother and sister and of my father's first wife. We don't have photographs. The only way you had photographs was if somebody from Europe sent them to America before the war, and then the American relative said, here, I have photographs of your family. Otherwise, you don't have photographs. So she sees this as very valuable for herself, for her friends, for her relatives. She starts giving it out. Giving out the photographs, not realizing the historical importance of this thing. Finally, at some point, after she goes back to Hungary, somebody says to her, you know, this is a very important. They get back most, but not all of the photographs. They bring them to the Prague Jewish Museum. There they're preserved, and there they're made into, and then eventually they're made by Yad Vashem into what we call the Auschwitz album. And it's a book that I think is on sale here as well. Which is an amazing set of photographs, and we're going to see more of them. There are more of them over here. Here you could see the building in the photograph. That's this building right here. And here you can see this is the SS doctor who is looking at the people and sending some to one side and some to the other side. Now, generally, the criteria was someone who was healthy was sent to work in a slave labor camp. Someone who was older or a child was sent to their death. By the way, 230,000 Jewish children arrived at Auschwitz. 230,000. Of them, 65 survived. Why did the 65 survive? Mostly because they were twins. And the SS doctors, including Dr. Joseph Mengele, did all sorts of medical experiments on the twins. Otherwise, none of them would have survived. So they're choosing people to go to the slave labor camp and people to go immediately to their death, right? Because it's a death camp, just like in Treblinka. People go immediately to their death. The proportion on average was 80% of those who arrived were sent immediately to their death. And about 20% on average was sent to the slave labor camp. But it was also the luck of the draw, meaning if they needed more slave laborers at a certain point, the proportion might be 50-50. And if they needed no slave laborers at that point, it might be 100% sent immediately to their death. But on average, it was 80-20. Those who were chosen to be slave laborers, their chances of survival were not very great either. On average, the life expectancy for men was 6 months here in Auschwitz, and the life expectancy for women was 2 or 3 months. And by the way, proportionately, more women were sent immediately to their death than men. And why was that true? They had the children. Any child under 14 was told to go with the mother. And therefore, there were mothers who were in their 20s, in their 30s, who could have worked, who could have qualified as slave laborers, but because they were with their children, were sent immediately to their death. Warehouses filled with the goods of those who were brought here. This picture is from the Auschwitz album. They named it Canada because That's right, the land of plenty. Apparently there was a gold rush in the interwar years in Canada. Maybe it was in the Yukon, I'm not positive. And so, America was called the Golden Medina, but in the interwar years there was also this idea of the gold rush in Canada and Canada having limitless resources. And that's the way the prisoners viewed this place. This place had limitless resources. Imagine if you were assigned to work here. What would be the advantages? You weren't allowed, if you tried to take something, you'd be beaten, but
people tried anyway.
People tried anyway. And you might succeed. Because, the supervisors are all around you, but at one moment they might be distracted or talking to each other, and you can have something that was brought by one of the incoming prisoners, incoming arrivals. What might you be able to take?
Diamonds. Trade it. Shoes.
Food, first of all. Everybody brought food with them. Okay?
Right.
So first of all, you might have food. Second of all, there might be something valuable, diamonds, jewelry, a watch, something else like that, which you might be able to barter for food somehow. If you were assigned to work indoors as opposed to outdoors, it increased your chances of living longer. It didn't guarantee anything, because at another moment, an SS guard could not like the way you looked at him and could shoot you on the spot. Or you could be someone who lost hope. So there are many factors involved here, but certainly it increases your chances of survival if you can work indoors, and if you can work in Canada, or if you can work in a kitchen. Those are probably the two best places to be able to work in terms of increasing your chances of survival. Because to survive on the rations that you were given for a long period of time was almost impossible. American Jews and American Jewish leaders were also not actively in the streets. When the voyage of the St. Louis went all up and down the east coast of the United States with 900 plus Jewish refugees who couldn't find a home, they didn't call a general strike. They didn't march in the streets in order to save those Jews, and that was just an indication of what was to come afterwards in the Shoah. Elie Wiesel, I once heard him speak, and he said that he did a research on shul bulletins in America. What were the shul bulletins writing about during the Shoah? And for the most part, they talked about the Kiddush and the Bar Mitzvah, and there was hardly a mention of what was going on in the Shoah. Remember, American Jews were not the American Jews of today. They were afraid themselves of anti-Semitism. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in America at the time. And then also there was great disbelief. There was great disbelief by American Jews, by American leaders. They didn't really cop what was going on. It was in the newspapers. The British had broken the Enigma code. They had every German transmission decoded. And by the end of 1942, they knew exactly what was happening. But there was still something, some people really knew, other people knew on a superficial level. Having said all this, I do want to say that whatever the Americans could have done, they could not have prevented the Shoah. Maybe if Hitler had been challenged in the 1930s, the Shoah could have been prevented. But once World War II began, it was a question of rescue, but not the rescue of millions, the rescue of tens of thousands. Even after they'll build 4 purposefully built gas chamber crematoria complexes, that 2 of them could take 800 people at a time, the other 2 could take 1,500 people at a time, the largest by far anywhere in all of the death camps. Still, during the Hungarian transports, they needed to take some of the bodies and burn them here in the fields because they couldn't burn the bodies quickly enough. Because during the Hungarian transports, you have between 5,000 and 10,000 Jews arriving a day. They were capable of murdering those people quickly, but burning the bodies took too long, and they had to use those fields to burn them in the open. The war was coming to an end. The spring of 1944, the Germans understood they were losing, and this goes back again to the second function, the idea of not the conventional war, but the war against the Jews. Time is running out, and they want to win this war. They're going to do their best to win the conventional war, but they want to make sure they can destroy as many Jews as possible. When you think about it, using trains, which were a very important strategic asset in a wartime, using trains to transport Jews from all over Europe, especially when they're losing the war, made no sense at all. At least not for the first war, the conventional war. But it made total sense for the second war, the war of race, the war against the Jews. Arriving prisoners are naked. They've been stripped of their clothing, stripped of any possessions they have. And here they are in a humiliating fashion. Shaved. This was one of the ways in which prisoners could be easily identified because they had bald heads, and that was not in style at the time. So it was a deterrent against escape. And secondly, this is where tattooing was sometimes done. It was only in Auschwitz that tattooing was done. They were not given a towel. The room could have been freezing and the water could have been ice cold in winter. What we have here is an exhibit of photographs, I believe from one town. These are not necessarily photographs of people who were sent to Auschwitz, although many of them may have been. These are photographs that the Auschwitz State Museum, when they opened this facility, asked people to send in order to put some faces on these buildings and on the stories of what happened here. Of real people. So crematoria 1, the gas chamber in crematoria 1 is in Auschwitz 1. This is number 2. This is number 3, twins of each other. And then 4 and 5 are over there. I want you to, again, imagine that from the Rampa, the 80% are being marched towards one of the crematoria. Let's say they're coming to crematoria 2 over here. These steps are not here. This whole plaza, again, is post-war. They're brought around to here, to where you see those steps. This is a building. This is a building of 3 stories. And we'll see a picture of the building. And you'll see that it looks pretty nondescript. If I didn't tell you this was Birkenau, and if you didn't know about the Shoah, you'd look at it and you'd say, it's a 3-story building. It has a chimney, maybe it's a bakery. Really a nondescript building. Everything terrible that's happening, it's happening inside this building, but from the outside you can't see a thing. So they come down the steps. And they go into this very long hall, which is about 50 yards long. This is the changing room. And they're told, hang up your clothing on a hook, remember the number. And again, I want to say some people may have known, some people didn't believe, and other people had hope against hope. This can accommodate up to 1,500 people. Up to 1,500 people. Similarly, crematoria 3 that we're not able to have access to now because of the preservation works. Crematoria 4 and 5, 800 capacity each. So you put the numbers together and you get 4,600 capacity, and that's about the size of a train load that arrived at Auschwitz, that arrived here at Birkenau, to be more specific. As you can see, the building is in the shape of an L. This is the long part of the L, and here to the left is a much shorter base of the L. After everybody had undressed, they were pushed into this part, the base of the L. And this is where the gas chambers were. There were shower heads. The deception goes to the last minute, but the shower heads are not operating. They're forced into here, and here they're forced into a very cramped space. You see here, there's a lot more room, 1,500 people. Here, people are crowded, and at a certain point, people understand it's not the showers anymore. According to the Sonderkommando, who survived, and there were some who survived, and some of them even wrote about their experiences, and some gave interviews, they reported that at a certain point, when it becomes very crowded, people understand this is too crowded for showers. And people understand the rumors are true, and what they didn't want to believe is true. And at that point, according to the Sonderkommando, generally, there was a lot of praying and singing. The Germans who brought the Zyklon B and dropped it in wore white coats as if they were doctors. And in truth, the SS doctors were no better than they were. They were also murderers. Here the Germans use assembly line production. They have elevators, which the Sonderkommando use, and they take the bodies up in elevators to the next floor. What is the ground level floor that we can't see right now. And in that ground level floor are 15 ovens, 5 groups of 3 ovens apiece, much more than what we saw at Maidan. In each one of these crematoria, 15 ovens. And that's where the Sonderkommando have the terrible task of burning the bodies. There's one more floor, and that's where the Sonderkommando lived. They lived above crematoria ovens. Here are the latrines. There are so many things that we, thank God, can't relate to. But I want here to talk about something that is not spoken about very often. And I apologize in advance for being a little bit graphic. But it's only for us to be able to more deeply understand. There's a book by Terence Dupre called The Survivor. It came out in the 1970s, I believe, in which he has many testimonies of survivors. He has a chapter there entitled Excremental Assault. And he writes the following. It began in the trains, in the locked boxcars. 80 to 100 people per car crossing Europe to the camps in Poland. And for Greek Jews, that was a 2-week journey. And here's a quote from a survivor. The temperature started to rise as the freight car was enclosed and body heat had no outlet. The only place to urinate was through a slot, though whoever tried this usually missed, spilling urine on the floor. When dawn finally rose, we were all quite ill and shattered, crushed not only by the weight of fatigue, but by the stifling, moist atmosphere and the foul odor of excrement. There was no latrine, no provision. On top of everything else, a lot of people had vomited on the floor. We were to live for days on end, breathing these foul smells, and soon we lived in the foulness itself. Dr. Gisela Pearl was a Jewish woman doctor who survived Auschwitz. And she wrote the following. There was one latrine for thousands of women, and we were permitted to use it only at certain hours of the day. We stood in line to get into this tiny building, knee-deep in human excrement. As we all suffered from dysentery, for those who don't know, is terrible diarrhea. As we all suffered from dysentery, we could rarely wait until our turn came and soiled our ragged clothes, which never came off our bodies, thus adding to the horror of our existence by the terrible smell which surrounded us like a cloud. This was not only a way for the Germans to humiliate the Jews, to take away the last bit of dignity, it probably also made it easier for them to do what they were doing to the Jews because they were filthy, they were smelly, they were less than human. Terence Dupre writes, the new prisoner's initiation into camp life was complete when, and this is from a survivor named Unsdorfer from the Lodz ghetto, when he realized that there was no toilet paper in the whole of Auschwitz. And he writes, and I would have to find a way out. I tore off a piece of my scarf and washed it after use. I retained this little piece throughout my days in Auschwitz, and others did likewise. I could go on, but I'll stop here, because I think you get the idea. Something that's not talked about very much. The smell, the stench.
My father said he was in the 11-day journey from Greece, and he said they did give them some food in the thing. They gave them a barrel of currant jelly, which only gave them diarrhea. He said that's what he had for 11 days was some brown currant jelly, right, and everything that you said.
I want to share with you two things that I heard from my father-in-law, Alav Shalom, and mother-in-law, Alav Shalom. They were both survivors of the type that didn't speak about their experiences. And when my wife and I were newly married, we went backpacking through Europe and to Israel. And it was the summertime. And a friend of ours, this is in the 1970s, a friend of ours had told us about Dachau. At that time, nobody visited concentration camps, but Dachau was in West Germany, and Dachau was open. My father-in-law had been a prisoner in Dachau. And so my wife and I decided we were going to spend Tisha B'Av in Dachau. We arranged our Ural pass so that we would go from Scandinavia to Switzerland, and we would stop off in Munich. We'd spend Tisha B'Av. At that time, I wouldn't want to spend a penny in Germany. We didn't want to go to Germany, but we figured, you know what? Let's go to Dachau, see where my father-in-law was. So we went. We had our experience. We came home with photographs. We showed my father-in-law pictures of the latrines, and they looked just like this. And my father-in-law looked up and he laughed. And we had been to Dachau, we had seen the latrines. We looked at him and said, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "They sure cleaned the place up." Talk about sanitized versions. I'm not saying that the State Museum should recreate here what it actually looked like. But what we are seeing is extraordinarily sanitized. My mother-in-law told my wife, her daughter, almost nothing about her experiences. But she did tell her this. She arrived in Auschwitz as a young woman. I think, we don't know how old she was, but let's say she was 20 years old. She arrived in Auschwitz, and she told my daughter that when she arrived in Auschwitz, she got her period. And there was no toilet paper in the whole of Auschwitz. There was nothing. This is humiliation. This is helplessness.
I'm a very tired, old and worn out man, and my eyes have long been blind. Most things that people say to me just seem to slip my mind. Oh, but the suffering and painful times that were in years long gone are still as clear upon my memory as the numbers on my arm. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? Who will stand before the world knowing what to say when the very last survivor fades away? When I hold my grandson close to me and his fingers trace the pattern of my tears, he asks me, "Grandpa, tell me, why do you cry? What is it that you fear?" And I tell him there once was another child who smelled as sweet and felt this warm, but he was taken from before my eyes, and only I remain to mourn. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? And who will stand before a world that now wishes to deny? Or will they believe in someone who never heard the cries? There is nothing I can say or do to make things change. Time has a way of passing by so fast, and like a fleeting shadow, no one will recall the faces of the past. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? Yet one thought gives me comfort, it's all that I have left. Oh, I know that God in heaven won't forget.
The message
of this week, of this journey, is the message of the Para Aduma. We have visited the Afar Ve'efer, we have seen the piles of ash, we sit before a chimney that sought to destroy our people. We are the Mayim Chayim. We are the future. It's up to us, Nikadesh Shimcha Barabim, to go home and dedicate our lives to sanctifying God's name, to making their sacrifice have meaning in us, to rededicating ourselves to that flag and the people who live in that country, through advocacy and through efforts and through generosity, and ultimately through, please God, moving there and joining the destiny of the Jewish people in our homeland. But the message of this journey is not one of nostalgia or history. It's not an end to itself to see these places and tell others. It is a means to be able to grow from the atzvas, as the Shem Yishmuel said, to be able to resurrect, to come back to life, to be that Mayim Chayim. I want to thank all of you for being on this journey together, this extraordinary journey. I've been so inspired through each of your insights. Seeing the achdus that was created from our diverse group is something which is such a tikkun. It's such a repair for the sinas chinam that's going on in the world. And that too is part of our mission going home, bringing back the sign of life, which is only when we are together, only when we are one. And if we had a mission to Poland, we have an even greater mission going home. That's when the mission really begins. Not showing pictures, not recounting stories, feeling that sense of mission together. Thank you.